Of all the lasting changes a post pandemic world may bring, closing theaters